The region that I chose for my case study is Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is most often conceived as a place of chaos, massacre, and oppression. Because of its history, much of Sub-Saharan Africa is underdeveloped, poor, and still continuing to engage in cultural conflicts. The main issues that cause the conflicts in Sub-Saharan Africa include globalization, violation of human rights, lack of democracy promotion, terrorism, and a protectionist position in global trade. Globalization is the process of international assimilation due to changing world views, politics, and ideas. The interconnectedness between nations and continents have played a major role in many of the issues Sub-Saharan Africa faces. Globalization has both helped and hurt developing or industrializing economies. A major way in which globalization has hurt Africa's economy are the examples of transnational trade through the oil-rich Niger Delta and the civil war in Angola for blood diamonds. Both of these conflicts are examples of the exploitation that occurs of developing nations by those greater industrialized countries. Conflicts such as these create inequality, poverty, and environmental destruction. Globalization has also opened windows for greater communication, therefore faster movements, among terrorists, which will be better explained later. Overall, Sub-Saharan Africa seems to have been affected much more negatively than positively from globalization. As you can see in this Global Competitiveness Report from the World Economic Forum on Sub-Saharan Africa, some countries such as Mauritius, number 45, and South Africa, number 53, are globally competitive and able to keep up with other developed nations. There are only a few, in addition to Mauritius and South Africa, on the global competitiveness scale that prove to be competitive. Otherwise, Sub-Saharan Africa is a weak contender in global competitiveness because of their lack of infrastructure, institutions, and higher education. Their overall market size is also lower. Another extremely prominent issue in Sub-Saharan Africa is the issue of human rights. The countries of Sub-Saharan Africa are subject to infringements on freedoms such as the right of expression and discrimination against the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. In fact, homosexuality is officially a crime in 38 Sub-Saharan Africa countries, according to the Amnesty International Human Rights Organization. According to freedomhouse.org, many of these countries' governments are considered partly free and some not free. Furthermore, countries that are considered free are only labeled partly free as their level of freedom of press and expression. Along with the suppression of basic human rights such as the right of expression, many nation citizens are subject to active violations on rights by their governments such as forced relocations. Forced relocations are still occurring in many countries. Recently, on June 26, 2014, the United Nations officials posted a press release demanding the Republic of the Congo, or Congo-Brazzaville, cease forced expulsions of the DRC. Since April 2014, there have been an estimated 130,000 people expelled from the Republic of the Congo to return to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where they were from. Refugees from the Democratic Republic of the Congo fled to the Republic of the Congo in order to escape the escalated violence experienced by the northern part of the DRC. Forced expulsions by the Republic of the Congo is in violation of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Fortunately, other countries are taking stances on their imposed lack of freedom. An example of this is America's refusal to renew Swaziland's eligibility under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, until Swaziland improves their protection on human rights. Another example of foreign intervention is African Human Rights Affairs is the first African Leaders Summit in Washington, which will bring together U.S. policymakers as well as over 50 African heads of state. Democracy promotion related to human rights is moving slowly in South Africa. It is a lot more widely practiced than it was, specifically from 1960, the beginning of colonized nations' independence, to 1991, where not a single African country experienced organized elections. As stated previously, the majority of sub-Saharan African nations are considered only partly to not free because of African leaders' refusal to democratize. As you can see in this representation of sub-Saharan Africa, there are only 5 countries, Madagascar, South Africa, Namibia, Uganda, and Ghana, that are labeled moderately free, and only 1, Botswana, that is labeled mostly free. The rest are repressed or mostly unfree. Although many are not full democracies yet, there has at least been movement away from a one-party system, and rulers at least go through the motions of holding elections. Swaziland is the only state that is still an absolute monarchy. The absolutist rule is reflected in their human rights violations, as mentioned before. Although many nations still do not promote democracy, there are some that have embraced it, such as Ghana, who was visited by Barack Obama for his first presidential visit to sub-Saharan Africa. Terrorist groups, specifically Al-Qaeda, prove a great threat for many impoverished nations. In one recent example of terrorism in sub-Saharan Africa, in December 2009, a young Nigerian man named Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, who was radicalized online and trained in Yemen, attempted to attack a U.S. airliner heading for Detroit by detonating explosives smuggled in his underwear. The media frenzy that followed was accompanied by the U.S. placing Nigeria on its list of countries of concern, meaning Nigerian citizens traveling to the United States would now be subject to additional scrutiny. Currently, the Global Terrorism Database contains 6,401 terrorist events that occurred between 1970 and 2010 that have been attributed to 349 separate terrorist groups spread across 45 of the 47 countries in the sub-Saharan region. The amount of counterterrorism groups have been increasing recently in sub-Saharan Africa in response to terrorist groups such as Al-Shabaab, meaning the youth, a Somalian-based cell of Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram. Boko Haram figuratively means Western education is sin. Both of these groups would be considered religious terrorists and global terrorist groups. French military forces in Niger were another reason greater counterterrorism efforts have been issued. Interestingly, and related to globalization playing a key part in terrorist groups, social media plays a big role in Al-Shabaab's group membership. Al-Shabaab's Twitter feed openly discusses the use of terrorism as a legitimate means to an end. The Twitter account is under HSM Press. There are many tweets such as these, praising Allah and accusing the United States of attacking innocent Muslims on a daily basis. Sub-Saharan Africa is one of the world's most protectionist regions. African leaders refuse to open their markets to foreign competition. Sub-Saharan Africa is riddled with shorter lifespans of citizens, high infant mortality, greater cases of HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis, undernourishment, and poorer education. Other developed nations continue to encourage Sub-Saharan Africa, like Doha, in lowering their trade tariffs and increasing trade liberalization, but African leaders are hesitant. According to the World Trade Organization, only 10% of exports were traded intra-regionally compared to Europe at 68%. South Africa has moved away from trade liberalization, but British relief organizations such as Oxfam, the Southern and Eastern Trade Negotiations Institute, and the Third World Network continue to encourage trade liberalization among sub-Saharan African countries. In order to shelter the world's poorest countries from competition, the World Trade Organization has also created special rules called special and differential treatment, which provide developing countries with the trade preferences and technical assistance they need. Sub-Saharan Africa's poverty is due to political instability as well as protectionist trade policies. Therefore, in order to improve their citizens' living conditions, lifespans, and health, there is research that supports the benefits that would be reaped from trade liberalization. Issues such as human rights infractions, effects of globalization, terrorism, and restrictions on trade in sub-Saharan African nations are often dismissed or not placed as high of a priority, specifically by the Western media, especially compared to conflicts in other regions of the world. 28 sub-Saharan states have been at war since 1980, but have received little foreign attention. Cultural clashes in sub-Saharan Africa are very prominent in underdeveloped countries. An example of intercultural strife would be the Rwandan genocide, fought between the Hutus and Tutsis. There have been numerous amounts of massacres like the Rwandan genocide that have not been brought to attention by the Western media. For example, the death toll from the conflict in the DRC is 1,000 times greater than that of Israel-Palestine. But there is much more media coverage and interest for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Sub-Saharan Africa is currently experiencing major environmental, political, and social issues. It is a hot spot for high fertility, lower life expectancy, cultural conflicts, and populations greater than the land can support, but the Western media spotlight is turned in other directions, leaving the American public oblivious. In conclusion, the sub-Saharan African region is perceived by the rest of the world as a region of disaster, disorganization, no free will, and overall discontent and poor life quality among its citizens. The causes of this instability, outlined previously, have been countered by forces such as different global organizations who are working with sub-Saharan African nations to better their qualities of life. Hopefully, the nations of sub-Saharan African region will be able to move more toward democracy, increase the human rights of its citizens, and open their markets to global trade in order to better their economy. Thank you.